In this part, I'm going to talk to you about solving math problems. Now, don't be fooled by the fact that there are only 3 bullet points on here. That might make it seem like there's not much that goes into solving math problems, but there's really a lot that goes into it. The thing is, though, it's not something that can be taught most of the time. Instead, it's more something that you can be guided towards. So, I think it's best to focus on some things that helped guide me towards solving math problems effectively. So let's start with the first point. So first look at the problem, then read the problem. Now, I want to start by making a distinction between the word look at a problem and read a problem. So when you look at a problem, this tends to be what most people do. In fact, everyone should do this, right? Where they take a glance at it to get like a general idea of what the problem is. And I think everybody does this. But the part that most people struggle with is going beyond just a general glance. That's what the reading is. The reading is really breaking down the problem into its pieces and seeing what each piece of it means. This would require a lot of focus on single sentences, but what most people tend to do when they get stuck on a problem is they only look at it and they never really break it down. So first, get a general picture of what the problem is by looking at it. Then get a more specific picture by reading very carefully. Now on to the second point, practice makes habits. Now, pretty much everyone's heard the phrase practice makes perfect, but I don't think that's really the best way to say it. Practice is a good thing, don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to discourage you from practicing. Practicing is the most important thing about learning mathematics, I'd say. But you have to practice very carefully. Because, like with everything else, there are good habits and there are bad habits to teach yourself. And that's the point of practicing, really, is to teach yourself habits that you develop. So, be very careful with yourself. Really check your work and make sure that the things you're doing are good habits to form. Now, on to the last point, and I think this is probably the most important point. That is, use the bare minimum amount of assistance that you need when solving a math problem. Now, the reason you do this is because the more independent you are, the better you are at solving math problems. So, lots of people, I'd say most professors, talk about solving math problems being an issue of critical thinking, and I agree with them. But something that's often overlooked is that if you don't think independently, you can't think critically. So you need to start by building up independent thought, and then the critical thinking comes from that. Now, that's kind of a vague statement, but this is one of the nicer points in that it actually has like a very concrete way to train this, and that is using as little resources as possible when you're trying to solve problems. Your end goal, really, is to only work with what you know in your head. That's the end goal. But beyond that, there are many nice resources that most people are inclined to jump on almost immediately. Like they look at the problem and they don't quite know what to do based on what they have in their head. So then they think, okay, so I'm gonna Google it. I'm gonna you know check the book. I'm gonna email my teacher. I'm gonna look at Chegg and find a step-by-step answer. The problem with all of these, not all of them, but the problem with these is that they sort of push some of the responsibility away from you. and your end goal should be being able to solve a problem with all the responsibility being on you. That should be your end goal. Um, so what you should do, and this tends to be what I do, start by trying to solve a problem only with the stuff you know in your head. Now, if you can't do that, and be honest with yourself, don't like jump the gun and say, "Oh, I can't do that. Let me go on to other resources." Only go to other resources if you are 100% confident you cannot do it on your own. So, when you jump to other resources, try to be very minimal with what you jump to. Like, start with the textbook and your personal notes. That would be the next step. Then, if that still doesn't work, you still don't have the answer from those, then jump to maybe your professor or a tutor of some sort. And because those resources are more going to guide you towards it instead of giving you the answer still. They'll be more, it'll push more of the load off of you than if it was a textbook, but they'll still, in most cases, try to like keep most of it on you. Then at the very end, if you still have trouble with that, try looking at solutions online or look at Chegg Online. But try to save that as a last resort and really just do it to understand the process so that when you move on to the next problem, you don't need that resource. So that's a sort of idea, that's a sort of strategy you can use to think independently. And it's not going to happen overnight, it'll probably take some time. But this is something that I used when I was struggling with math, and this is something I still use today when I find a problem that I find challenging. Do as much of it on your own as you can. Only jump to other things if you need to, and jump to the things that will still leave most of the responsibility for yourself.